This is Brad Martins, the water chair. We'll call the meeting to order Monday, May 18th at 4 p.m. The first one is the New Shore Sewer Water Commission joint meeting. First item on the agenda is discussion and potential action regarding the approval of minutes on the February 10th, 2020 and the April 13th, 2020 monthly meetings. I wasn't there for the 13th. I'm not sure what everyone, the 10th looked fine to me, but we'll need a motion to approve those. And I will ask you, since this is a more formal meeting, when you start to speak, please identify yourself for Susie so that can be incorporated into the minutes.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go ahead. Brad Martins, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for February 10th and April 13th if there's no feedback otherwise.
Tom Doyle will second.
All those in favor? And you'll have to, again, Susie, you'll have to take a poll by person.
Yep, roll call. Tom?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Sandra?
I was not there, so I think I have to abstain.
Ah, yes, thank you. Brad?
Aye.
And I think that's everyone.
Okay. So we'll move on to the second item on the joint sewer and water, which is discussion and potential action regarding recommendations to the town council for commissioner reappointment and or vacancies. Susie, what do we have for
We have
candidates right now?
3 commissioners that were up for renewal or expiration on April 30th. Tom Doyle, Diane Haid, and Sandra Venezia. And all 3 said that they would like to stay on.
Okay. Then I'll make a motion that we approve them as staying on, if that's what you need to do. I'm not sure about that one.
We need a motion to recommend to the town council.
Okay.
Thank you,
So
Susan.
this is Brad Martins. I'll make a motion to recommend to the town council that the 3 commissioners who current date in office expires April 31st, Diane, Sandra, and Tom wish to stay on, and we are making a recommendation they do.
Steve Draper, I'll second that.
All right, roll call. Tom?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Sandra?
Aye.
Steve, sorry.
Aye.
And Brad.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving into the water district, discussion of potential action regarding the High Street Payne Road water main replacement. John? Or is this going to be more Amy?
Jim and I can take this. The funding, as you know, the project's pretty much shovel ready at this point. On the funding, the letter of conditions have been executed, which means we've essentially have secured the grant money and the loan for this project. The issue in lies now is that we need the voter approval for bond authorization. So that's what we're waiting for. With the COVID restrictions that are in place, we can't, everyone agrees that it's also irresponsible to get the community together in one room at this point. Jim, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I spoke with or emailed USDA, and basically it's 18 months from the time we bid the project to have the project completed, or within 3 years of the obligation. So I believe the obligation was in April. So we have 3 years from April to complete this project. So those are the only, as they indicated to me, those are the timelines right now. So depending on when you can get the financial town meeting to authorize the bonding, that will dictate how fast we have to move on this.
Are they flexible due to the current situation? I'm just curious.
No, that's a grant condition. Well, Brad, I don't know. It was a grant condition at the beginning. They are reluctant to extend it beyond 3 years based on, they want to obligate and spend the money within that period of time.
So do we.
Yeah.
Money's cheap right now.
You can't, yes, you can't, and 50% grant or 45% grant is even cheaper.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
that, we could, John and I had spoken earlier, even if there was a bond authorization today, let's say, we were thinking because of the potential COVID restrictions, not knowing what's going to happen September, October, we might have pushed it off until January of next year to get the contract underway. But other than that, it's really now it's in the council's purview to get this awarded or get the
Okay.
bond authorization.
Well, I'm sure the council wants to, and the finance wants to get it underway as well, I would think.
This is John Bruning. Can we dovetail this discussion into that bullet point, Amy? Or you're muted, Amy.
Is Amy here yet?
She's
Yeah.
muted.
There.
How's that? That's good. Particularly if it's unlikely that we'd be starting work in the fall, based on all the other things going on in the world. The cleanest and most efficient way at this point to handle the bond authorization is as a ballot item, a local ballot question in the November elections. And John, this is new information for you, but I did have a conversation with bond counsel today who confirmed that while we may do other things to deal with financial town meeting and budgets, those mechanisms are going to be less than perfect and they would not be appropriate for a borrowing question of this type. So really we're looking at likely a November ballot question, which allows people to vote by mail. We may have to restructure our wording a little bit to make it clearer. If you really thought that we still had a chance for a fall construction, and therefore if we could get it out to bid and get it authorized, we could continue to push for an off-cycle mail ballot or an off-cycle referendum, but that's really going to burden the clerk's office in a way that I'm not sure that they can handle right now. And so if we're looking at pushing off construction, I think November is probably the way that we'll head for that question.
I'm only concerned about the construction. Let's say we get a reoccurrence of what, the shutdown that we happened. I don't want to begin a construction project, then have a delay claim like we have with the sidewalk to restart and start the job. I think it's more appropriate to let's just follow it and go into the spring of next year. We will still complete it within 18 months forward, because the plan would be is to have them begin in April of next year, and if not completed the water portion of it, finish it up in the fall. And if they finish the water, they'll finally do the final pavement at that point in time. It'll only be a little over a year from the original obligation date.
I wouldn't be in agreement with that because I don't want to see above ground water in the wintertime either, just in case.
Well, that's the concern, because we have temporary water that's part of the project. And if we're doing it in the wintertime and we get a delay, and we're in a position where we can't stop the job, I'll have above ground water and John will have to deal with all the freezing. So I don't want to do that.
This is John Bruning. So what I'm seeing from this, Jim, is that you kind of got good news from USDA that the November ballot measure wouldn't be the end of the world. We wouldn't lose our funding, which was our concern. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. I did not mention, we were trying to be a little bit vague
Okay.
in our presentation, in my question.
Okay.
With that, I'll go back to them and say, because of this, we're going to have the bond referendum in November. Does that present any problem? Now we got the facts. Let's go back with the actual time frame and go from there.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right.
If I may, this is Amy again. I think that'll actually be sooner than the clause we had added. Because remember, we had put in a component that said we would hold a financial town meeting within a certain amount of time from when the state released all their restrictions. Given the track that we're on for gatherings, I don't know that we'd be able to hold one before November. So I think
Right.
this is actually a more expedient solution.
Right.
I concur.
This is
Yeah,
Jim. I'll
Tom
let-
Doyle, I concur too.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for the updates, Jim and Amy. You guys gave me some new information. I think, everyone's on the same page, which is great.
Okay. So moving on, item 4 on there, everyone's in agreement as well. So item 4,
Do we need a motion
Discussion of-
for that?
oh, we do?
No,
Do we? No? Okay.
no,
I don't
that's
think we have a
just an
choice. Is there a motion involved with that?
update. No, just an update. I think we're fine.
Okay. All right. Discussion of potential action regarding water financials and aging.
Okay, this is Mona. Let's see, so we're going into our last quarter of the fiscal year, and obviously it wasn't a good one. We were down in the gallons billed by just under 38% for the water company, and we see that reflected in the revenue
Mhm.
compared to the prior. Other than that, a lot of our bulk of our expenses are fixed. So it's not like they went down, at the same rate. Do you have any questions about the revenue or expense lines you see before you?
I'm all
Okay.
set. Anyone else?
I don't understand how we're still on the same budget, but we're down. Our usage is down. So how is the number? Are we carrying the same number? Or maybe I'm just not understanding the document correctly.
Are you talking about the water usage number?
Yes.
So compared to last year, we billed for about 38% less gallons than we billed for this year. I'm vice versa. We billed for 38% less this year than we did last year at the same time,
Right. So if we're down 38%.
based on consumption.
Right. So I understand that our a lot of things are fixed, but if we're down 38%, how does that change the numbers as to what we have coming in for revenue?
Because I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. We bill based on consumption?
If I can jump in,
Maybe I'm not
this
understanding.
is Amy. Let me try to just repackage that. Your year-to-date numbers for water usage on a cash basis are almost identical, 374,000 versus 379.
Okay.
But this year we had a higher budget, so your cash numbers are the same, but we're actually at a lower percentage of total, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think I was asking the question correctly, but.
And I wasn't explaining correctly, so forgive me.
All right, thank you.
Let's see, if you have
Any
other
other questions? Any questions on the aging? It looks pretty
Scary.
much normal. What's that?
It looked scary to
Very
me.
usual.
That's just what I
Uh,
think.
I have a question.
What?
This is Diane
Addie?
Haid. I have a question about the aging. I'm not clear as to, like, if you look at number 57, it's really very high. what kind of correspondence happens in a case like that?
Well,
we're
what we
looking at-
our method of getting accounts up to date has become the tax sale, which happens every other year. This year, we were right in the middle of preparing for the sewer tax sale when we had to bring it to a halt because of COVID. So next year would have been the water's tax sale when we would have collected all revenues due. So basically,
Okay.
until the tax
So
sale,
normally-
if people aren't paying, they're just paying, we're collecting interest on the account.
Okay.
So I have a
And-
question.
They get
a lot of
they
these-
get a bill every month. Sorry. Go ahead, Brad.
I have a
This is
question.
Brad. Okay.
Hello. Who's up? You, Brad? Go ahead.
I don't know. I was
Right,
going
that's
to try
okay.
and say to Diane is a lot of these customers, you haven't been on here long, certain customers like number 57 and others associated therein. This is pretty much, unfortunately, standard procedure for them. They
Yeah.
don't pay till very late.
They have to.
Okay.
Exactly. They're not the only one, but that is what happens.
Right.
You know, and they do pay.
I'm
It
just curious.
it
I
puts
just saw
a
the
huge
numbers and
number
I
on
thought,
there.
yeah, okay. I guess as long as they pay, it was unusual and I just didn't see any attempts
For them, it's
along the
standard.
way,
We tried to correct that one time, and we did for a couple of months, basically. But anyway.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
So I have something.
Any other questions on aging? Okay.
I have something to say about it. So let me ask a question about the tax sale. So that falls under the COVID rules?
So, David Petraka here. Pete, if what Collectively Finance and myself had discussed as things were kind of evolving COVID-wise, the governor, through the Public Utilities Commission, issued a stay on all collection proceedings to do with all utilities. Now, granted, you were not governed by the Public Utilities Commission, but we felt at least a delay in starting up the process was at least warranted, following what the rest of the state was doing in terms of collection proceedings.
Yeah, but did we talk about that? Did we talk about that at any of our meetings?
We have not, no.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably something that should have been discussed. That's just my opinion. Because I'm not sure that it falls under the rules of that we should wait another year before we do it, because it's going to get worse, not better. And I'm just saying. I mean, if we decide not to, I don't know, exercise our rights after the sale, then I'd say that's up to us. But at least we went through with it. You know, I mean, we can put on the brakes, can't we, if we decide to?
Sure, and because of the startup cost, because once you started the process, the clock starts ticking. We thought a delay in starting, to probably align with the rest of the states around the state going away would be more prudent. So if I can only speak for myself, it was never my intention to wait until next year, but rather than having the process started last month with the eventual tax sale culminating in July, if it occurs in September or October, we're no worse the wear, and if anything, we've collected more interest.
Well,
in the short term, we're
in
still
one of
allowed to
the- in
collect
one of the-
interest we didn't.
Yeah, but in one of those cases, we're not going to collect any interest because the property was sold, wasn't it? Unless I don't understand. I don't remember the customer number. But so the property was sold, or at least I heard it was, but I haven't seen anything happen up there. But waiting on a particular one doesn't seem to be in our favor, does it?
Anyone that purchased,
Go ahead, Mom.
go ahead. I was going to say, anyone who purchased that property would be responsible for any outstanding balance, including any interest accrued.
Amy?
All right. I just,
And along
I'm just-
along those lines, if you had a purchase that actually had closed, part of the MLC process requires that those fees be paid. So I highly suspect that it hasn't actually closed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
and aren't
it's highly
outstanding,
probable.
this is Tom Doyle. I guess the question's for David. Aren't outstanding taxes collected from the seller? From the
Typically,
purchase
in
price?
a purchase and sales transaction, especially if there's any kind of financing involved, what's known as an MLC, municipal lien certificate, is issued to protect the lender and the purchaser, where it says everything that's outstanding, not only from the local taxes standpoint, but our water and sewer fees end up on there as well. And without those fees being paid current, you can't get title insurance, you can't get a loan. Like, it's all going to be part of the closing process. So if there was some sort of asset purchase or some other, non-traditional closing where maybe there was a cash deal, who knows? Maybe one was not procured, but the clock still runs, and the interest and all those fees continue to run against whoever the new owner is. That's usually why they want it taken care of at closing and paid by the seller out of their proceeds. So.
Well,
So
that makes
I don't know if the particular one that Pete was referencing, but if they did sell and that went forward, whoever the new guy or gal or company is on the hook still, with the running interest if they haven't paid. So
Yeah.
All right. Well,
So in other words, we're covered.
Yes.
yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Pete. You wanted to
Well,
say something? It sounded like it got cut off.
Oh, no, I guess that's all I had. I just, I guess I was surprised that this got put on hold, and I don't think anybody on the commission knew about it. So I just was surprised that somebody wasn't kept in the loop on the fact that we decided to halt the tax sale. That's all. That's all I had. I just, and there you go. Enough said about it.
All right, Pete. I'm sorry, that was never the intention. But I'll follow up with you tomorrow.
That's cool, man. I'm good.
I have a question. So if someone has a large bill and we don't have a lien on their property, and then they decide to close down, it's a bad season or whatnot, does that bill follow them in their sale without a lien?
It's an automatic statutory lien. So we technically, for water and sewer, have a lien against every property, just as any taxes, property taxes would,
Cool.
or tangible taxes for that matter. It's a different kind of a lien, what you might have the lien on, but in this case, it's against the property. And again, we're talking about one, call it collection mechanism is the tax sale. And it's kind of the ultimate because you can lose the property if we go through to the end and someone purchases it, or the commission ends up purchasing it. There are other methods, especially on the water side, where, they either don't have the water turned on or it gets turned off, or they're not given their meter at the beginning of the season. I mean, John can talk more to those practical matters. We try all those, call it lighter methods or of compelling people, persuasion at first, and the tax sale is kind of the last effort, because it is a drastic measure.
Right.
And so far we've had 100% success rate even with the most delinquents, and we've been doing this now 6-7 years. I don't know how long have you had me around.
Yeah, sounds right.
But no, we've been able, some have cut it pretty close. On the sewer side, there's one in particular that likes to cut it close, to pretty much days of the sale. But someone bails them out eventually. But we get all the fees that are incurred as far as the tax sale, my fees and mailing fees, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all collected from the person or entity that is in the tax sale. So it's an effective method, but
It's not like it's funny, haha. It's just Like I was on the commission, then I left and I came back and it was like the sheet never changed. The numbers did, but same thing.
The numbers change, but it's always the same character.
Enough said, enough said.
Yeah. The usual suspects.
That's right.
Okay,
So I think
we
Mona
got
was
a
in the
lot
middle
to
of-
cover. So
Mona-
moving
Mona
on,
done? I think
if there's no
we
other
kinda-
major questions.
I'm done.
What's that?
Okay. No, I felt like Mona was talking and then we started
I
asking.
didn't hear Brad or
Okay, Mona,
I
did
think
you
we're
have
all
something
set
else
with
to say?
financials. Nope, not at all.
Okay.
Thank
Water
you.
operations report.
I have 2 reports in this. I covered March and April. We've been keeping up with things that have been going on. We're still in a kind of funny staffing regiment where, you know, our worst case scenario here is, you know, the 3 people that know how to run the water plant getting sick at the same time. So currently we have kind of a treatment operator and a distribution operator that seems to be working out well. And we're, you know, trying to make it work without getting in each other's spaces, I guess, is how we're doing it. But we're getting along, or I wouldn't call it full capacity necessarily, but we're getting done what needs to get done. You know, the big stories continues to be, as we'll get into later on this meeting, that our, you know, metered revenue is and our flows are kind of stuck in the mud when they should be increasing. Other than that, you guys can read the reports. If you have any questions, you can let me know.
Okay. Any questions from anyone that has read it? Okay. So moving on to the sewer district. Pete, I think you're on here now.
Yeah, I'm here. See what we got here. Discussion of potential action regarding Ned Phillips Jr. concerning the property lease. I don't really have any thoughts. I don't know what the commission's appetite is for reducing rent. What do you want to do?
Has Ned reached out to you at all, Pete?
I just saw him once in passing. He said, I wrote you a letter and I sent my first month's rent, and I'm interested in, you know, and that's about it. I mean, I haven't had a personal conversation with him. I kind of thought he'd be on this call.
I reached out to him. I didn't hear back. So.
I mean, I think we should move forward with it as is, and then if he approaches us, you know, we'd have to take it under consideration. But I wouldn't do something preemptive.
Yeah, I just don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know. I'll be truthful with you. I'm not looking at a copy of the letter in front of me right this instant, and I can't remember exactly what it said. But I think at the end of the day, the gist is he doesn't know how many takers he's going to have for his spots up there, and he doesn't know what his collections are going to be like, and so he'd like to know what the appetite is of the commission to, I guess, reduce his rent. Because didn't we went up $1,000, I think, last year, or we had a schedule. I don't remember if he was due to go up this year or not. Was he? Amy, do you have that?
I've got the copy of the letter. Do you? This is Brad. I've got the copy of the letter. Do you want me to read it for everyone?
Well, no, I was just curious. Was he scheduled to? Yes, I do, but I just wanted to know, was they scheduled to go up this year?
I don't think he was. I'm pulling it right now. I don't think he was. In fact, I think the contract itself had was just continuing on its I don't know what you call it, the legal word for it, but just continuing on the terms, it was kind of ready to be looked over again.
Okay.
So it's
Well,
just running on that, we'll go year to year until you guys decide on something different.
Okay.
The letter, this is Sandra, the letter didn't say, or didn't ask for a specific amount. All it just said was, you know, here's my first check, and I really like to have a conversation with you on the effect on the tenancy and the revenue. So we don't even know if he's going to have, or maybe at this point, he doesn't even know if he's going to have 2 people or 10 people.
Well, at
Well,
this point, I don't think we make a change because the letter does say he'd like to know when our meeting is and he'd like an opportunity to speak with us. He's not here. And if we need to look at that, even after the fact, I mean, that's appropriate at this time with everything that's going on right now. But I don't think you should.
So don't you think we should just figure out whether we have an appetite? So I can go talk to Ned and say, hey, you know, how's your rentals? What's going on? What are you looking for us to do? I mean, what's his rent now? 19,000 maybe?
20,500.
And I think we started at what, 7.5 or something like that. I mean, I guess what's our threshold for where we would be willing to tolerate?
I think we would have to consider that pretty carefully. We're in a really tight spot ourselves.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be approaching him. He should be approaching us. We don't go in with, well, we can do this. He needs to come to us and say something.
I didn't have any intentions in saying that, but I just wanted to know from my own personal knowledge what our appetite.
Yeah,
is.
what's our limit, right?
That's what I'm after. I'm not going to go talk to him. No, I agree with you 100%. If he is interested to speak to us, he can look us up or look me up or look somebody up and say, hey, you know, will you do, you know, this amount? And the question is, I won't have an answer for him unless we talk about it at the meeting.
David, did you have something to say?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, you know, if I wouldn't advise in a public setting that is being broadcast and whatnot, getting into specific numbers, if appropriate, and if the commission has the appetite for it, we could meet under a potential litigation closed session at some point in the future where we could talk about the economics and whatnot, if that's something you're willing to entertain, as opposed to having this discussion, you know, broadcast for him to hear, and then he knows, right?
I wasn't. Well, I mean, I don't think it's okay to say whether we had an appetite to do it or not. Was my point.
I don't disagree with that. I was just saying specific numbers is all. So.
Yeah, I'm certainly not putting out any numbers. Well, I guess what we'll do is I'll just wait until to see what he has to say, and then I will tell him that he should attend our next meeting, and I guess we can talk about it then. And if to your point, David, if we want to go into closed session, I guess we can.
And to bring that point up, how do you go into closed session on something like this?
There is a way. It's complicated, but you know, essentially, it's a meeting within a meeting. You know, perhaps a different login and whatnot. There's been a couple different ways. I've done it in other communities. You know, basically, this meeting continues to run, although none of us are present. Is how it would work. So it's almost the inverse. Rather than kicking everybody else out, we leave, and everyone else stays, so to speak. So. Again, you know, if that's something you're interested in, we can explore that. You know, it might just be that, you know, Susie sends a letter saying our next meeting is blank. If you'd like to be on it to, you know, make a proposal, so be it. And then we could put on afterwards a closed executive session for us to discuss. Right. So.
All right.
This is Tom. That to me sounds very elegant as a solution.
I'll go with that, Tom. Sounds good to me. Let's just write them a letter and see if we get a response.
Mm-hmm.
I'd suggest
Yeah, we
putting a
might-
drop
if
dead
it-
date in the letter, like respond, I don't know, 2 weeks or prior to the meeting or a week and a half, so we can have a chance to figure out if we need to go through the rigmarole of executive
That's
session
a
and
good-
whatnot, so.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, this is Tom again. I think the mention of executive session or whatever you want to call it is a good idea.
All right. Do we
So in
need
other
any
words,
kind of?
figures are not going to be discussed in open meeting. And
I'll make a motion that we send a letter to Ned Phillips Jr. That if you'd like to discuss this, he'll be informed formally of when our next meeting and date and time, and he can put forth his views.
I'll second that.
And
All those
then
in favor?
Roll call, Sandra,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Tom,
aye.
Steve,
Aye.
and Brad.
aye.
Cool. All right. So we got that out of the way. Let's see where I'm at here. I already get back to the thing here. All right, let's see here. We got potential action that Phillips. Okay, number 7, discussion of potential action regarding relief for sewer water customers or allocation penalties and interest post COVID-19. And I guess this sort of had something that's been sort of rattling around in my head a little bit. I mean, I guess my thoughts were is what's fair going forward, and I guess my thought was is do we allow users to roll forward any underage or any underused portion to the next year, or how would that? I mean, is that like handled in a particular way, Amy? I guess the question kind of goes to you. If I mean, we've probably never had this happen, so maybe you don't have the answer, but I'm just thinking what would be normal operating procedure.
Hey, could I chime in just for 1 second before Amy speaks?
Sure. Yeah.
So I've been involved with several American Water Works Association surveys and whatnot, and I'm looking at the results of a survey that was done across the country for water and sewer districts and companies. And I just want to give you a feeling, the commission a feeling of what everyone else is doing across the country. And I'll just read off a few numbers of, in the line of what you're talking about, Pete. 96% have suspended water shutoffs. Of course, we kind of have to, I believe, due to the governor. 71% are suspending late payment fees. I believe for us that would be our interest fees. 63% are allowing flexible payment plans. 35% are returning suspended accounts to service. And it goes on from there. There's a bunch of other ones down the line. But 71% suspending late payment fees. It's a pretty big, number of utilities doing that. So anyway, I just want to give you a window into what's going on outside of our bubble.
Well, I was thinking a little bit differently than that. And I was thinking like, well, just say Joe paid his bill and he paid for his allocation, which was 40,000 gallons. But this year, because Joe's business is half of what it used to be, he only uses 20,000 gallons. Do we allow that underage on his allocation, thing that he paid for it, to go towards next year's if he goes over?
Allocation's a one-time purchase.
But doesn't he have to pay for that allocation each year?
No, it's a
No.
one-time purchase. So you buy it. Or if you go over, you can purchase more or pay the penalty. So,
So that's my point. So
okay,
will we
that's
allow
not an annual charge.
if he went over the next year, will we forgive that?
No.
No.
I would believe we're not
So
going
there's
to see a lot of overages this summer. I would believe.
I would agree with that one for sure. This is Brad.
Mhm.
But I mean, you purchase the allocation based on what you think your usage is going to be, and you if you're over, you're over. But you don't get a credit for not paying for being under to use in the future, because it's quite normal for someone, to be perfectly honest, John, you can correct me, but for sometimes people to be under their allocation because they purchase more than they need, so they don't have to worry about penalties.
I would say 90+% of all of our accounts stay under each year. No.
Okay.
I know we do. We've been here, 20, 25 years, and only once did we go over.
Okay, well, that answers my question. If everybody's under, then it's a moot point.
Do you think the commission wants to entertain anything with holding interest or anything like that?
I think that is the right thing to do with regards to interest charges, at least for the time being. With a lot of other things out there and everyone else giving people break insurances and everything else, trying to help people, this is going to be a tough summer for everyone. So if they're a little slow on paying and they pay, I don't think we should be throwing the interest on there, but Amy may have a different viewpoint on that.
I have two different texts. I'll come back to the technical one for you, David, in a minute about the enabling legislation. What most communities that I've talked to are doing about interest, and this is more on the tax side, but I think it probably parallels on the sewer and water, is that they may be waiving interest for those customers who are and have been consistently current. So if you're sort of that usual suspect list, you're not going to be forgiven interest on those past due balances, and you're going to continue to accrue interest on your growing balance. If you're someone who's historically been a current and paying customer, then we would entertain some latitude in not charging interest while you got through whatever you needed to get through. In order to make that happen, we'd probably need an application type process, because that's going to be really manual for us from an administrative standpoint, but it doesn't seem appropriate to wholesale some of our other customers.
I would agree with that, because it certainly would not charge interest on people that everyone was questioning earlier, as an example.
And so we'd have to set some criteria that everyone agreed with, so that it was clear up front. But before we do that, David, do you have an opinion on sort of the language of the enabling legislation that says we shall collect interest?
You might not want to ask my opinion, depending on what your policy goal is. I'll answer it without answering it for the time being, because you haven't asked.
And then I'll keep going then.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of communities are doing it anyway.
So yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say is, in my other communities, from a town standpoint, right, that language in the law is shall and mandatory and how it all works as well. And while there's nothing in the law that essentially says you can change it from you municipality can change it, what essentially is happening is they're following similar to what you're saying in terms of, if you've been current, maybe they're extending the due date or a particular quarter, or whatever it might be, because you usually get, say, like a 30-day grace period, or something like that, right? So they're extending their grace periods. Now, is there authority in the law to do that? No, not in my opinion.
I believe there is for these two commissions for extending due dates. And so
that might be different. I'm talking about the taxes, right? So
Yeah.
I'm keeping it at a different level. But the point is let's assume for the sake of argument that there is no authority. Does that mean you can't or you shouldn't? You know, those are policy decisions ultimately. So think of those things through before you ask the specific question.
got it.
Okay, well, I don't think we got anywhere there. David,
No, you
really
did.
not-
It's subtle, that's all.
We did. We got somewhere.
Can I
Moving
ask,
Is that
on.
something that,
So I got my question answered. I guess Amy's kind of got her question answered. So I think we're done with that one on number 7.
Diane, did you have a question?
I had a question, Sandra.
Oh, Sandra, sorry.
Sorry, I wanted to ask this question of Mona before. It's unrelated to late fees and penalties and whatnot. There's a line item for backwash fees that we have budgeted $13,848 that is zero to date. So when does that actually come into play? Because we're negative 13,000.
That's a year-end journal entry.
So do we normally meet that?
Yes, to the penny. It's a figure
Yeah.
that's given to us by John.
What exactly is a backwash fee?
It's
John?
it's kind of mislabeled there, and I thought we had changed it to concentrate. Fee, or it's the amount of concentrate or the byproduct, from the RO process that goes through our force main to the sewer between October 31st or November 1st and April 30th. So we divert our concentrate stream, and the sewer treats it in the winter. And then in the summer months, we're permitted under a RIPD's permit to discharge it to the ocean with the sewer discharge. So that's what that number is. And I calculated every year based on, we record these numbers daily and then we add them all up, and then that's where that number comes from.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are we all set?
I think so, yes.
All right, number 8, discussion of potential action regarding the status of Rhode Island Department DEM wastewater treatment facility grant application.
Well, I guess I'll begin and then I'll defer over to Jim. This is Dylan. There is no potential action on this beyond what we are going to do for the upcoming fiscal year. It's a conversation that will be ongoing. For me, everything remains on the table. I will say that we did receive the resiliency grant from the DEM. I was happy to hear that news. I believe it was for what, $229,000. And as far as our timetable goes, I will defer to Jim on that.
Okay, Dylan, Dylan's correct. That we put an application in for the resiliency grant. There was a project or a grant system that was established by DEM for flood control, floodplain compensation, etc. The application went in and basically we're under $500,000 in project cost. So we fit under their small projects. I think it was like $440,000 plus or minus, of which DM granted a 50% grant on the project. At that time in the grant application, we indicated that we would begin this fall with construction to begin fall and to be completed by next summer. However, we had a Zoom meeting with DEM. Pete was in attendance, Mona and Dylan. And basically what we had indicated to them, and I wrote a letter on the commission's behalf saying, due to the uncertainty, again, with economics and everything going on, we'd like to move this off, at least during that 6-month period, moving October to January type deal, moving it into January through the spring of next year. That would allow us to design the project after January and in the construction in the fall of 2021. That would help in the funding this year with limited expenditures until we get into next fiscal year and the budgets going forward. The only thing we'll do this year is we have the surveyor coming out to do the surveys on the property. I have him coming out on another town project, so I wanted to do economics here and just get him out one time to do both of the projects and save some transportation and mobilization costs. And that number is about $2,600, $2,700 for survey work. So the minimal cost, once we get that survey, then we can continue the design in a reasonable pace when budget permits. And remember, as this is what they call a one and done, the commission through the town has to fund everything, the whole project cost. Once the project is completed, we then request the grant money, and then the grant money is forwarded to the town. So it's not something that you get grant money as you go or have to pay 50% of the project. Like USDA, you go into the loan for us, close on the loan, and then the next half of the project becomes basically free. You pay for it, but get reimbursed as you go along. In this particular case, project has to be totally completed. We have to certify the project, and then you'll get reimbursed. So we want to move this off into, I guess it was FY22 for the bigger expenditures.
Right.
That will help, and hopefully we'll come back to normal with this COVID-19 and the funding and everybody getting back with the revenue. It's pretty much close to what it was last year. That kind of just summarizes it. We're still in the process of completing the grant notification with DEM, but that's kind of where we are.
Thank you, Jim.
Any comments from anybody on that?
Does anyone have any questions to understand the project a little better?
Maybe Dylan, maybe I should say that one of the things that we've been talking about with Peter and Dylan was to provide you a graphic of what it's going to look like. Most of these are to elevate the pump stations, electrical and controls to prevent flooding from occurring at the stations. But this is going to elevate the location at the station. These the walkways, the generators, the controls are going to be elevated. So my plan is to, within this year, to develop an architectural rendering, so to speak, just to give you an idea of the elevation, because it will be above ground. They'll be more exposed to the public, and they're in locations where the public and the residents have a clear view of the station.
Are you gonna show them the one with the cupola and the disco ball, Jim?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. We'll try to get the same painting on the like OA1, with maybe we'll get the Rhode Island School of Design out here to kind of do a surfer on the tank or something like that. So a little fish.
Right.
But I plan to get that to the commission probably after the first of the year, just so we can talk about it. And so it's not a surprise.
Talking on the phone.
No surfer. There's no surfing on Block Island.
No surfing, okay.
Can you help me out?
A little fishing, man, a little
There you go.
with a fishing pole in the wet well, you know.
All right. Well, that sounds good, man. So I guess we're all set on that. I haven't heard anybody else say anything. Are we all set on that? We move on?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, discussion of potential action regarding sewer financials and aging.
All right, this is Mona. So as far as what was billed for gallons, it's not quite as drastic as the water, but definitely still much less than last year. So they were down about 28% in what was billed. The sewer had a 2.5% increase to their usage fees last year, so that's why, Sandra, as you were asking with the water, we're not going to see that dip look as extreme when we're looking at the prior year-to-date to the year-to-date actual. Other than that, looking at the expense lines, does anyone have any questions? Okay.
All right. Everybody all set on that?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
All right,
right.
let's move on.
And by the
Let's
way,
move on to the
when I look at that sheet, it does say that we've accounted for 20,500 in last year's budget for parking revenue.
Okay.
For
Well,
this year's budget, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know whether or not he's gonna even say anything. We'll just have to see. I mean, I know he's people still renting up there, and the lot still looks pretty full. So I don't.
Okay.
All right, Dylan, operations.
All right, so similar to the water, I've included both the March and April report. Also, similar to the water, we've restructured our work schedule for operators, as well as Susie. Susie's working from home now until further notice. And we've, again, restructured our functions to separate and keep everyone safe. Operations continue as normal. There's been no interruption in testing or sending out labs. So everything's been going as well as it can. There hasn't been any real interruption at all, and everyone seems to be, other than in the beginning of the COVID outbreak, there were, Joe had been dealing with some things, and we took some extra precautions with some of our operators, but other than that, everyone seems to be faring very well. No concerns, and operations are going on as usual. So far, so good.
Excellent.
Does anyone have any questions about operations or the reports?
Very good. Everybody, I guess a motion to adjourn.
Are there any commission announcements or anything?
I don't have any.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we adjourn. This is Brad.
I'll second Pete. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, Susie's got to take a roll call on that.
Roll
Okay.
call. Steve,
Yes. Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
and Brad,
Aye.
and Pete.
Is that me? Aye.
Motion carries.
Nice. Well, thank you, everybody. My phone's about ready to be done.
Pete,
We also
we're not
have,
done.
go ahead,
Yeah,
Jen.
be well, stay healthy.
We're not done.
We're not done. We've got a budget meeting. But if your
Oh,
phone's
that's
dying,
Plug it in.
so
I don't have
we'll
any-
go ahead and call the budget work session, I believe, number 1, for the New Shore Sewer District and the New Shore Water District together at not 4:15, but 5 p.m. May 18th.
And I will leave. Thank you very much. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye, Jim.
Take care.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye,
Hi,
Jim.
Jim.
Do want me to start, or are we waiting?
No, let's go ahead and
I
start.
think we can go right ahead.
All right. So we have a summary included with our budget. It's pretty brief. So John and Dylan and I started working on these budgets in February before everything went down. And so this is going to give you an idea of what we were looking at before. You know, what we needed to fund, and what kind of revenues we were projecting based on usage in the prior year. So I'm just going to move forward with that. So we had budgeted for approximately a 12.5% increase to usage fees in preparation for the water main replacement. An 8% increase to the monthly customer charge in an effort to continue moving forward towards the 100% debt service funding. And a substantial increase to fire protection, 52.7% increase, which would bring the revenue closer to the cost of covering those fire protection services. Before we move from revenue, is there any questions there?
Can you tell me what is fire protection? Like, what do we do to provide fire protection services?
Sure, John?
I'll take it. Yeah, and Sandra, this was a discussion. You know, we had a lot of discussions this fall before you were back on the board.
Just give me the cliff notes.
The cliff notes is that when we started our rate design project, a glaring difference between us and some other communities were that they were getting a lot more revenue, percent revenue from public fire protection. So I looked into it further, and it turns out that we were way off the scale when it came to percent of revenue for public fire protection. Essentially, in a lot of communities, there's a lot of different models, but a lot of models take taxpayer revenue to pay for public fire protection. That's what we do here. We just weren't nearly recovering anywhere close to what the industry standards are. This would bring us up to essentially close to 6%, which is what the industry standard is. This is public fire protection to have water readily available and the infrastructure in place to fight a fire. Essentially, it's like a standby service. And we were kind of selling ourselves short with what the rest of the country and other water districts are doing. So we're trying to bring that up to at least the bottom.
But is that money coming from users, or it's being?
That's coming from the tax base.
Good. Okay. That answered my question.
Any more? Okay. All right. All right. With this budget, you'll see a very small contribution from reserves. That's very different from what we've seen in prior years with the water company, and mainly what that has to do with is because we don't have numbers in yet for the High Street water main, as it's not expected that the project will start in fiscal year 21. So if everyone's okay with me moving to the expenses. Okay. The budget, the pre-COVID budget you see before you has included a 2.5% shared increase. John's done shared increases over the last couple of years, and he included that this year, as well as additional funds budgeted for overtime. We hadn't been budgeting for overtime in prior years. We have kind of a significant jump in lab testing, 64.2%, and that is just due to some specific testing that's only done every few years, and this is an on year for that. Any questions on the expenses before I move forward with the capital projects?
No.
Okay. Moving to the next page. The capital projects are funded from reserves with the water company. We have the cathodic protection project, which was something that was in place for this fiscal year, but needed to be postponed due to COVID. And so now it's planned for fall 2020 in conjunction with the tank inspections.
Mm-hmm.
We have a truck replacement. It's in need of replacement. It was in the capital improvement plan in a future fiscal year. I believe it was fiscal year 22, and but now it's become a priority. And then we have the High Street water main, and that project continues to move forward. Authorization for borrowing by the taxpayers and the construction timetables are all contingent upon the status of the COVID-related restrictions. We've got more detail on the budget itself that John added with some numbers relate to the project. So this is where we were before. Amy, would you like to add?
Sure, and what I'm going to say here applies to both of these budgets. So right in the middle is probably the right time. We all thought it was important, Mona, John, Dylan, and I, for the commission to understand how things would have looked in a normal year, what the priorities were, what the operating expansions were, where capital needed to be addressed. But the reality is these budgets are not going to be able to go forward. To what extent they have to be cut, we're still working on. I think John, and now I've lost mine, here it is, I'm writing on it. John sent around this chart.
Yes.
I've been really enjoying seeing the flow production in that it's the most visual way for us to understand exactly what we're up against. The idea is that when we meet again for our next budget work session, you will have a revised budget that starts to take these priorities and trim them down in a way that meets what the anticipated flows for this summer season might be. One of the other things we're trying to understand is just how close that red line starts to approach the blue line. And literally every day of data is important in this. It helps us know where we might be for July and August, but also where our reserves might end at June 30th, and therefore how much of a bridge we're going to have and how far we can get with it. So not to be the doom and gloom presenter, that's kind of what my job is here today, though. Did I miss anything, Mona?
Nope, covered it.
So basically, on our next meeting, we'll have a little bit more data to make better projections with.
Yeah. But you know, again, we wanted you to understand what the priorities were going in, so that when it's time to either defer some of them or commit to maybe dipping into reserves more than we want to, you can be informed. So that's why we're starting with this today.
So if this says pre-COVID and say next month, next month really is June, how much of, you don't really have any kind of summer numbers. It's going to be a hard push for you to really talk about what we could be facing in July at that point.
No matter what we've got, it's not going to be perfect. We know that. And we know that it's going to hit water more than it's going to hit sewer. We saw that just in the April numbers, and so far halfway through May. Water's running about 50% of flows, and sewer I think is closer to 72 or so in terms of billed flows. So we also know the two companies are going to diverge in the impact on them. But if we know that 50% is creeping up to 60, that's a good thing. If it stays in that 50% number for water flows, we're going to have to react a little differently.
Is the $7,000 in wages went from 193 to 200? Was that the overtime that Mona was talking about?
The 193 to 210?
Yeah. Yes.
That is, I'm sorry, not 193. Budgeted for fiscal year 20 was 200, and then up to 210 for fiscal year 21.
Right.
Yeah. So that is the
Overtime.
that is, yeah, that as well as a 2.5% increase.
Right.
Shared raise.
Okay.
About 5,000 in overtime.
Okay.
And we already do have, among the four of us, a series of models that have worked out, what some of the ideas are. But again, we want a little more information before we decide which one or ones to put in front of us.
Right. So how is it going to look if someone has a very old water bill, and then John says, and they say, okay, we want our meter, and John says, sorry, no can do, you have a very high bill. Is it going to be, oh, we want you to do a payment plan? I mean,
I didn't really feel like we do payment plans anymore. They honestly, when we were trying to do them, they didn't work out. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, John, you haven't been holding meters though, have you?
No,
Yeah.
due to all this, David and I have had numerous discussions about holding meters, and it kind of falls under that,
right.
executive order. You
Right.
can't cut off water and all
Okay.
that. So, and
I don't want to belabor the point. I always get stuck on these numbers, and then
no, it's okay.
It's-
Other water systems have done that, and I believe they weren't very successful.
No, I bet not. And it's probably not good public relations anyway. So.
No.
Okay, sorry.
And we're looking for revenue. We want those meters.
We need
Yeah,
it.
I agree.
Yeah.
On the good side, if you got to buy a truck, now's the time to do it. I hear these dealers are desperate to sell vehicles.
That's all I have, unless anyone has any questions.
Let's move on.
Okay. All right, going on to the sewer. All right. So one thing I neglected to include in the presentation is that on the revenue side, we did budget for an increase to the septic waste disposal fee up to $150 per 1,000 gallons. That way, it is currently at $125. So that's that jump that you see there. We did not have any proposed rate increase to either the user fees or the monthly customer charge. The monthly customer charge is functioning as intended. It's covering the debt service that we have. Obviously, if we end up taking on more debt with upcoming projects, that would change. If there's no questions on revenue, I'm going to move forward to expenses. On the sewer side for the wages, it includes a 2.5% increase. And then again, additional funds budgeted for overtime. The consultants other line brought down by a pretty significant amount just based on operating plans for fiscal year 21. We have our conference, training, and travel line that was increased in order to send an operator to some intensive training. We have our electricity and fuel oil lines. They tend to move in tandem. And they shift a little bit this year as a result of a planned generator use for a few select months out of the year. And you'll see water expense savings just due to a change in operation method. And then new this year, the supply line was broken down into 3 separate lines. It didn't change from last year, still at 60,000, but it was just broken down to allow the superintendent to track those items separately. We have system maintenance reduced, again, quite substantially, but that is based on the operational needs for the upcoming year. And then in the capital equipment line, what we have there is the full replacement of garage doors on the service building. Like the truck that has become a necessity to be addressed this fiscal year. Any questions on the any questions on the expenses before we move over to the capital?
No.
Okay. So on the capital project, as Jim said, we're not expected to be incurring the expenses of the resiliency project yet, except some engineering fees. So that's what you'll see there in the about $26,720. And that would be coming right out of reserves. Moving down to the apartment revenue, nothing substantially changing. We're tracking the electricity usage for the apartments a little bit, it's a little more accurate than it has been tracked in the past. So we're going to be increasing that slightly just to match reality. And again, the revenue from the apartments is at a surplus, so that ends up contributing to just the sewer plant operational revenue.
I have a question on the loans, on the debt service and the loans, the USDA loans. Is it more trouble than it's worth, Amy, to, you know, can any of these interest rates be renegotiated?
It's not more trouble than it's worth, and we look at it often. The challenge is that because USDA issues 40-year loans, and you can only refinance back to a 20-year at most, what you have to take in for an annual payment is often beyond the reach of what the company can absorb.
Got it.
We do look at them every once in a while, though, just to see.
So if you renegotiate, so if it's a 40-year loan and you go back and say, you know, what's the rate now? They might give you a rate, but a shorter note.
You're never going to refinance with USDA. You have to go to market.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that's the key to remember with USDA loans. If you can actually get yourself to refinance within the first year or two before you're in a habit of these ridiculously low annual payments, then it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And we're going to plan for something like that with the water loan before we get too far, shorten that term.
I know you look at it, but I see 4.375 and I go, really? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions on this pre-COVID budget for the sewer? Sounds like no. Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mona.
Mona.
Thank you. All right, is that it?
Are we good?
Seems like we're good. We're meeting again next Tuesday.
Yep.
We have a new person on our meeting.
And she's gotten very.
Yeah, she had enough of mom. She wanted to see dad.
So yes, our next work session will be next Tuesday at 4 o'clock.
Wait, what's next Tuesday?
Our next budget work session.
Okay. Are we doing that via?
I think Amy has something to add.
Thank you, Dylan.
I thought she was waving to. I thought
I thought you were waving to the baby too. I'm sorry.
Okay,
There's a
I
baby.
think we do have, I don't want to keep anybody longer, but I think we have one more topic.
Oh yeah, we do. That's right.
Oh yes,
Which
discussion
and
of
maybe Dawn
options.
and I can.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'll start, but I'll try to keep it quick. Because we're struggling with how to do this on the town-wide scale. I guess I would put it out there that I think it wouldn't be quite as crazy, and particularly that David's a little better versed in this than some other people around the state, to try to do our annual meeting on an electronic platform. It has some compromises in process. I think we know that, but I think every other approach is also going to. So I guess I wanted to start that conversation and see what bridges we might need to cross to make that happen, or if people are not comfortable with that at all, in which case we need to come up with other strategies.
So the question is, we're going to do all this budget work, but can we actually pass it in our restrictive state?
So, for David here, I mean, I can give you my perspective because I've run into this in all of my communities, actually. I have one community that is on their third month of their fiscal year and haven't been able to pass a budget, right? So, because they follow a financial town meeting model. And your, specific enabling legislation here models that, process, and it doesn't have an out per se, right? And this is something that, again, the entire state is struggling with. There is disagreement about certain aspects of the state law as well, that may or may not be addressed by the General Assembly when they reconvene. Amy, I'm sure you've been on some of those calls. The League of City and Towns has hired, to my knowledge, Michael Marcello, who is a solicitor in other communities. And I know he has the opinion, and others do as well, that the continuing appropriations aspect of state law, there's a specific statute. His opinion is that it doesn't allow for revenue to be raised. It's only that the previous year's budget, just the expenditures are allowed, but not the revenue raising. I personally disagree. My firm personally disagrees. And that's one of the issues is, if you're unable to hold a financial town meeting, that law would make no sense otherwise if you couldn't actually raise the revenue to go along with it. And again, it uses expenditure and appropriations differently, so appropriations has to have some kind of meaning. So my opinion and my firm's opinion, and we've advised our clients as such, if we're unable to hold a financial town meeting, or the legislature doesn't provide for specific relief, whether it be in the form of allowing a one-time you know, mail-in only referendum ballot, something of that kind of a, you know, one-off solution. Your default is that provision, because any form you do in terms of a virtual meeting right now is disenfranchising somebody or somebody's. And we are hesitant, and we have not advised anyone to go forward otherwise. There are a lot of creative solutions that are being bandied about. I have to say my personal favorite, for a whole bunch of different reasons that aren't legal, but is the new drive-in model. And it's essentially, you know, you find the biggest parking lot you can, and you have the canvassers go car to car, figure out who's a voter, and everyone listens to the meeting on an FM transmitter, and there's a couple of mics scattered about, and do the vote by hand. You know, the canvassers go around and count the hands in the car. That's about as close as I've found from a legally, you know, saving standpoint that you can get through. Now, I have communities that isn't even allowed because there's specific enabling legislation says it has to take place inside a certain particular building. God forbid the building burned down, right? Anyway, so, you know, I don't want to stand in the way of progress. Let me, you know, be forthright with that. But I do have some very specific and well-founded legal, you know, reservations about different ways that I know others in the state have either done or are planning to do. And I'd be remiss if I didn't raise those concerns with the group. So I don't have, like I said, I don't have the solution. It's right now, you know, if we were able to say to get to a 25-person limit, right now we're still at 5. We're hoping to go to 10 by the end of this week. We were hoping to be at 10 2 weeks ago, and it didn't happen. So from what I understand, it's supposed to go 5 to 10 and then 10 to 25. If we can get to that 25 limit, I'd be more comfortable at least attempting an in-person, you know, meeting, financial meeting.
Well, God knows we usually have, this is Brad, 3 or 4 voters present.
I know. That's why, and that's why I'm comfortable at 25, but not 10, because you're gonna exceed
David,
10 with just the commissioners and staff present.
Oh, well, I kind of meant we're
Would
part of the
you-
voters anyway half the time.
You are. Go ahead, Amy.
You don't have to answer this right now if you don't want, but is there a model that gets entertained that's a hybrid? If you're at 10, where you have a combined in-person and electronic meeting?
Your enabling legislation doesn't allow for that now. It's a meeting. You need to have a meeting.
And the emergency provisions that say you can change the location of a meeting wouldn't apply?
It would satisfy the Open Meetings Act, the OMA, but not fundamental voting rights and constitutional due process.
Okay.
That's my opinion. And it's not just mine. I have to stress that there are, you know, it's not just my proposal either. But and the point is, there is no agreement there is no consensus either. So, but that, you know, I hate to use the phrase, but the lowest common denominator, you have to think of in terms of access. You know, I mean, I have a very good internet setup, for instance, and it dropped once during this call, right? During the previous meeting, I should say. And I was able to get it back up. But what happens when someone calls in and they get disconnected and they can't figure out how they're supposed to vote yes or no, and all these kinds of things add up to almost a class-wide disenfranchisement. And now it might not be picking on a particular group, but there are plenty of people who fall into that category of, I can't even dial the password correctly on my
I'd like to draw
the types of considerations when we get to, all they had to do was show up at a meeting. And that's the bar. So.
I like the drive up Palm Beach parking lot. I like that idea. The FM transmitter, the church, the
No, I mean, I said it half jokingly, half tongue in cheek, but I think it's something that can be done.
So I think we'll keep talking about this, David. No, obviously, I hear from a lot of solicitors with a lot of different opinions, and that's why you need to be the one governing this board. But we can keep talking about it. I have one other question that's probably unique to sewer and water, which is that they don't need the funding side of an equation because it's actually the board that sets the rate. It's only the budget, and that makes it a little different than the municipal side. So maybe we can talk about that too.
I agree.
At
no,
a
I
different
agree with
time
that.
or offline.
And so, one thing to keep in mind, yes, we should, but one thing to keep in mind in that vein is worst comes to worst, like we can't even get above the 5-person limit. My record is budget and appropriate, on the board side. We might not hit those projections that we need to, but I mean that's something we'll have to. That's the fails, and we've run on that until we're able to hold a financial town meeting or financial meeting, annual financial meeting. Now, I think I may have given John or Dylan or state law historical New England town meeting aspect, and I'm going to spare you all that right now. I can recommend books if you so choose, but this used to literally be how every meeting of a particular city, town in New England operated. Was everyone got together at the church, whoever the electors were. There was no town council or city council or mayor, and they literally made every decision that way. And this is literally the last vestige of that, and they do it for the most important thing that's left, so to speak, and that's setting the budget and the financial outlook of the community, or in this case, the district. So there's a lot of historical precedent that's old and doesn't really account for this sort of thing. But they've always just said, well, delay it, or the last year, goes forward. I mean, that's the default fail-safe that's built into state law for it. So, fun times.
Okay.
Well, I didn't have anything more, but I did want to put that on the table. I think it's important for people to understand some of those really boring technical challenges that we're going to come up to next.
Okay.
I'm doing my best not to be an obstructionist. You have to believe me.
I believe you. I believe you.
Your background doesn't help, though.
It doesn't. No.
Dark side.
But what is the, why can't you just say Town Beach parking lot, FM radios in that model? Like, why? That seems so easy.
I haven't said no to that. That's relatively new as of Friday.
Okay.
As a model that's being talked about, based on the success of it, so to speak, in church gatherings, believe it or not, around the country.
The Baptist Church did a Easter up at the Sullivan House, and it was highly successful with the FM radio. Yeah.
Yep. That might be the best solution I've heard so far. That seems to check all the constitutional boxes. The ability to get out and get out of their car and speak is going to be the tricky part, only from a technological standpoint, potentially, unless you have the board of canvassers acting as Maury Povich walking up and down the cars with the microphone in hand. So, but I think those are all solvable solutions, and that's like I said it half tongue in cheek, but I think that might ultimately be how it's done in a larger setting. You might not need that given your general attendance, and that's why I think with these districts I'd be comfortable with as long as the limit is at 20. And they're allowing the hybrid, call it virtual, and this way staff like myself doesn't need to be present and take part in the number count, so to speak. But anyone who wanted to vote would have to be there.
Isn't any restriction though, like what if, isn't any restriction, I know you have like, oh, we normally only have this much, but isn't any restriction disenfranchising people? What happens when you get the 26th person? I mean, I don't know.
Well, then, that's a great question, John, actually. And so my opinion is, if that were to happen, you get to 26 is at the door, the meeting's canceled or postponed. This is anticipating that not be an issue.
Okay.
And that's why it's a you are correct. Any restriction is technically a disenfranchisement, but it doesn't become an actual disenfranchisement until someone tries and they can't. So again, in that scenario, we're setting up the same form as you normally had. And it's like reaching fire capacity. Think of it in those terms.
Yeah.
Adjourn, cancel the meeting, find a bigger location. In those cases, in this case, we got to wait till we're able to have more people. That's allowable under an executive order. So.
Thank you.
No, great point.
Do you think, David, this is Tom Doyle, do you think that we will get to 25 anytime soon?
It's possible in June. The metrics that the governor has been using has been, it has to be 2 weeks on average of a certain decline, and I believe it's hospitalizations. Don't quote me on that. And while we had that to get to quote unquote phase 1, she decided to keep the person limit at 5. So she's supposed to reevaluate that by the end of this week, because that order, so to speak, expires on Friday. So the hope is that she'll at least go to 10 people starting Saturday or next week. And so in theory, 2 weeks from this Friday, we're right in line for, our regularly scheduled, so to speak, financial meeting. We might not even miss a beat, technically. Now, there's so many factors depending on it, and the most important one is, what the governor's view of the situation is at the time. Because it could go in the other direction too. If there's a spike, she said she's going to scale it back without it turning into an outbreak. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not a soothsayer.
No.
My daughter certainly wants it to go back to normal. I'm sorry.
He wants this meeting to be over. Thank you very much,
She's
David.
just singing to you guys. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, David. And just so everyone knows, David's been keeping us well. Dylan and I, at least, any executive order or anything, he's been keeping us up to date on, on Block Island, you can be on this bubble, and David's been keeping Dylan and I very up to date on, all the legalities surrounding all this. So I appreciate it right now. He's been excellent keeping us informed. So thank you.
Well, thank you, David.
No, thank you guys. I appreciate it. If Amy and Mona, we want to start something, in terms of a weekly or bi-weekly, even phone call, check-in, whatever you feel is appropriate. I'm more than willing to do so. Usually with not child, underfoot.
We're all in the same boat, David.
Yeah. Not sure we could say the same. Okay, thank you. All right.
So we're all set?
Yeah, as long as nobody else has any questions or comments.
I always wonder,
Yeah,
do we
Susie,
have
what-
to, do we adjourn this meeting or not? We always get into this discussion.
Yes, I'll make a motion that we adjourn this meeting since we had to call it to order.
All right, second. Tom seconds.
All right, roll call. Sandra,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
and Brad.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.